Notion's good at a lot of things, but no tool can do everything. And I think that some of us fall into this trap of thinking that Notion is the one tool to rule them all. And actually, this can be a little bit counterproductive. It's kind of like hammering a square peg into a round hole. In this video, we're going to explore some of the things that Notion isn't great at and other tools that you can use instead to overcome the weaknesses of the Notion system. We're also going to just discuss some guiding principles to help you decide what you use Notion for and what you don't. Hey guys, how's it going? For those new to the channel, my name's Tom, and here we talk about how you can use Notion to solve real life problems. So if that sounds like something you're interested in, bang subscribe and you're going to be notified when I release new weekly videos. So the first question that we need to ask ourselves when deciding what we should and shouldn't use Notion for is this: are you an iPhone or are you an Android? Now you might be thinking, Tom, what the hell are you on about? What have these two mobile devices got to do with my Notion use? Well, let's take a look at why it's relevant. Androids are infinitely flexible. You can change nearly everything about them. The Android OS can be ran on any phone that chooses to use it. The Google Play Store is also a lot less restrictive than the App Store, and the rules for developing apps on iOS are a lot more limiting. The price for all this customization? Simplicity, and that's where the iPhone comes in. iPhones are not infinitely flexible. iOS only runs on iPhone, and if you want to create your own mobile and run iOS on it, well, good luck taking to town to lawsuits by Apple. Joking aside, I think the fact that Apple own both the hardware and the software and the App Store, this means that it gives them unparalleled control over the whole user experience. And this is why people come to Apple again and again and again, even though they might not be as customizable as Android phones or even have the features that Android phones do. So by now, maybe you're joining the dots here. If you're an Android kind of guy, you probably want the flexibility that comes with having multiple different apps all stitched together so you can get exactly what you need from each of those apps, and you don't mind that the experience is going to be a little bit clunky because you want something that is absolutely perfect for the task that you're doing. If you're more on the iOS side, you're probably more likely to just want something that works pretty well but is really simple and is all in one place, and you like how it all integrates together, and that's what Notion is great for. Now, I personally fall on the iPhone side of the spectrum. I like having one app that can do everything sort of fairly well, but that benefits from the synergies of using everything together. But everyone's on this spectrum somewhere, and that's why some of the suggestions that I'm about to make in this video as to what Notion isn't that great at, you might not agree with. Okay, so this first one is quite controversial, but I actually think Notion isn't really a great tool for websites. Now, don't get me wrong, if you're just starting out, I think it's a great way to go from 0 to 1, from having nothing to having some sort of personal site. And that's exactly how I got started. My first site was a Notion site. But I think as soon as you start generating any significant kind of traffic, it's better to move on to a custom website creating tool. I have a few reasons why I think Notion isn't a great long-term solution for websites, and the first one is design. Now, Notion sites look really cool now. They look really in vogue, they're trendy, they're hip. But what happens in 5 or 10 years? I mean, if you look at the design practices that were used even 5 years ago, they just look horrifically outdated today. And I can't help but feel if you're always limited to the Notion block system and the Notion UI, your website's gonna look very dated very soon. In my opinion, you want to have a personal corner of the internet that shows your creativity, but also can be kept up to date with the latest design trends, and Notion just at the moment doesn't allow for this. Now, the argument against this might be, well, why not just wait until Notion stops becoming trendy as a website builder and then migrate the site, when that happens. And this is I guess a fair argument, but part of me thinks if you're making hundreds and hundreds of pages in Notion, it's going to be such a ball ache for you to move that site into a website builder when you could have just started out in something that was specifically made for building websites to begin with. The only real exception to this rule that I can think of is if your Notion site exists purely to sell Notion products or Notion services. And in this case, there's a really fair argument for making it in Notion because you want to practice what you preach, you want to showcase your skills, and Notion is the perfect tool for that. But I think unless your website is purely towards the sort of Notion idea of selling something, then you might want to consider using something different. Analytics and SEO are another slight issue in Notion. Now, there are some really cool third-party tools now, things like Super, that help you provide analytics and SEO to Notion websites. But when I've used these tools, I can't really help but think that they're existing to hack together something that wasn't meant to be. And it just adds actual headaches to the process of creating a website. If you're having to use a third-party tool to inject SEO code, it kind of, to me, takes away from the simplicity of using a Notion site if you're having to add all of these extra tools on top of it just to make it functional. Finally, as Notion doesn't have an API yet, and don't get me wrong, when that's released it could change it, but it means that you're going to be heavily reliant on Zapier if you want to integrate with third-party tools. Now again, it's not the be-all and end-all, but it's just another thing that can go wrong, it's another cost that you're going to have to incur, and it's another skill that you're going to have to learn. Whereas if you have a dedicated website builder, you're probably going to find that there's a load of integrations with things like ConvertKit or MailChimp or Analytics or whatever you're trying to integrate with, which just makes the whole experience a lot easier. If you're looking to check out a website builder that has a lot of flexibility but doesn't require you to learn code, I'd recommend checking out Webflow. I'm not affiliated with them in any way, I don't get any kickback if you sign up or anything like that, but it's just a really cool tool that I've found that is fun to play around with, gives you a load of flexibility, but also is pretty easy to use. Let's talk about spreadsheets. Now, I've tried really hard to try and replace Google Sheets with Notion. Having all of my spreadsheeting in one place, man, it would just nice up my workflow so much. Unfortunately, it's just not possible. You cannot replace Notion for a dedicated spreadsheeting tool, and here's why. Fundamentally, Notion operates where a row in a database is a page, and effectively that row is one chunk of data. Now, you can manipulate the individual data points in the row, i.e. the properties, but only within the limits of the property itself. You can't, for example, apply different formulas to different rows of a single property. Now, in a spreadsheet, the fundamental difference is that each cell, rather than each row, is its own sort of unit of data, and because each cell can be manipulated independently of everything else, it really does provide a level of flexibility that Notion can't compete with. Now, don't get me wrong, for very simple databases, Notion can work really well for things like meal trackers, for things like fitness trackers, for things like budgeting. But whenever you want to put together something a bit more involved, for example, if you're doing a business plan or any kind of financial modeling, Notion really does start to show its limitations. My go-to tools for spreadsheeting are Google Sheets, Excel, and Causal. You've probably heard of Google Sheets and Excel before, so I won't go into too much detail on those. But Causal is a really cool new app that's actually made by Ali Abdaal's brother. So if you follow this channel, you probably know who Ali Abdaal is. And it's a really great way for you to do things like forecasting, sensitivity analysis, any kind of financial modeling. Just absolutely blows Excel out of the water. So highly recommend playing around with that if you're looking for something to use for databases. Let's talk about writing. So I do the majority of my writing in Notion, to be honest. I wrote the script for this video in Notion. I do all of my brainstorming in Notion. But when I do what I call proper writing, i.e. that's writing that someone else is going to read, I never use Notion. And the reason for this is quite simple. My grammar absolutely sucks ass. But do you know what sucks worse ass? The Grammarly Notion integration. I mean, on the desktop app, I don't think it works at all. And on the web app, it's pretty suspect at best. It only really works when you've got a certain page selected. It can't do a whole scan of the page. Really not a great solution. So if you're like me and can't spell for shit, then I would absolutely not recommend using Notion to do any kind of long form writing that's going to be read by other people. Now, my general workflow is I'll do a rough draft in Notion and then I'll export it to Grammarly, and from here I'll just tidy things up, edit it, maybe collaborate with somebody else. Having said this, I have heard of people writing books in Notion, so either they've got incredibly good editors or they've got incredibly good grammar. Either way, these are two things that I don't have, so I'm better off just using the Grammarly web app. Now, I'm really curious if you disagree with me on any of these points. Do you think that Notion is the best tool ever for websites? Have you found a way to get around the limitations of databases in Notion so that you've completely replaced Google Sheets? Can you write novels in Notion? These are all things that I'd be curious to learn the answers to, because I'm learning about this tool all the time, just along with you. Also, be interested to see, where do you fall on this Android iOS spectrum? Do you sort of shun all other tools for the simplicity of just using Notion for absolutely everything? Or is there just specific use cases that you use Notion for, and then you plug this into all of the other apps that you work with? So yeah, please let me know in the comments the answers to any of those questions. Really interested to hear your responses. I'll also leave a video here for you to check out that you might enjoy if you enjoyed this one. But thanks a lot, and enjoy the rest of your day.